My name is Sharon Gerstel, and I have the honor of serving as the director of the UCLA Stavros Niarchos Foundation Center for the Study of Hellenic Culture. Welcome to our space in UCLA's Rolfe Hall. Kalimera και καλησπέρα σε όλους και στην Αμερική και στην Ελλάδα. I'm so glad you're with us today for this very special event, which inaugurates our celebration of the bicentennial of the Greek Revolution, a celebration that will take place throughout the year with lectures, classes, and on November 7th, the premiere of a theatrical performance, Makrianis Unplugged, which will travel from UCLA to Vancouver and then to Athens and Krokylio, the birthplace of General Ioannis Makrianis. This performance has been written and stars Yoros Karamichos and Panos Mouzorakis. Today's event continues our center's close collaboration with major Greek museums, a collaboration that began last year with the Benaki Museum and continues with the Museum of Cycladic Art and with others. But today we turn our attention to Spetses and to one of the most charming and important museums in Greece, the restored home of the famous heroine and Admiral Laskarina Bouboulina. I would like to underscore the important role that Laskarina Bouboulina played in the War of Independence, but also the vital role that she has played in the public imagination, since there is hardly a strong-willed little girl that hasn't been called, with great fondness, Bouboulina. And the name has been applied to other strong women as well, including, as we shall see, one of my heroines, the Greek resistance leader, Leila Karayani. It becomes therefore important for us to separate the facts from the fiction and to learn more about the life of Laskarina Bouboulina, her context, and her lasting impact. Following a tour of approximately 50 minutes, our speaker, Pavlos Demertzis-Bouboulis, will answer your questions about his ancestor, about the museum's collections, and about the museum's future plans. Before introducing today's speaker, it is my great honor to ask Her Excellency, the Greek Ambassador to the United States, my friend Alexandra Papadopoulou, to offer a few thoughts about the subject of today's lecture. Your Excellency.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gerstel, dear friends, and Mr. Bouboulis. It was so nice to see you just before the opening of this event today. Once again, it's a great pleasure to be partnering with the UCLA Stavros Niarchos Foundation Center for the Study of Hellenic Culture. Our collaboration has been especially interesting and productive, engaging a large and diverse audience from both the United States and abroad. And for this reason, we're looking forward to many more such events, not only with the center, but also with other organizations, but the center is always at the forefront of our efforts. And thank you, Dr. Gerstel, very much for that. As many of you know, this is a special year, and this is the bicentennial year of the outbreak of the Greek War of Independence, the Greek Revolution, 200 years since Greece was set on the path to freedom. And this occasion is memorized not only in Greece, but around the world, with celebratory educational culture activities throughout the year that shed light on 2 centuries of modern Greek history and culture. I'm especially happy that the subject of women and their role in the revolution has gained attention. And since I was a young child, since I went to school, all of us in Greece were raised with tales about Bouboulina, Madame Avrogenous, many other women who devoted so much of their life, their whole fortune, their dreams, their families to the cause of the War of Independence. Bouboulina was at the forefront of this struggle, and it was amazing that in a poll taken some days ago in Greece about the heroes of the Greek Revolution that are most known to the Greek public, Bouboulina was among the first 10. I'm especially happy that we featured 2 events on women in this series, one today and the other one on April 10, titled Fighters and Victims, Women's Lives During the Greek Revolution. And I hope that you will join us for this event as well. It is an honor to have Mr. Bouboulis today with us and take us through a tour of the museum. As I said, Bouboulina's role was defining for the success of the revolution, but it was also defining about the role of women, their self-esteem, their importance. And although the Greek society is very patriarchal, I have to say that within this patriarchal structure, women always had a role, always had a voice. And in today's Greece, this role and this voice is more acknowledged than in the past. Thank you all for joining us today. Thank you for Mr. Bouboulis for being with us, and I'm looking forward to hearing you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency. It is an honor for me to welcome Pavlos Demertzis-Bouboulis, Director of the Bouboulina Museum on the beautiful island of Spetses. Mr. Demertzis-Bouboulis grew up in Spetses and moved to Scotland to study business at the University of Glasgow, and you may detect some of the beautiful lilt in his accent as he speaks to you today. A sixth-generation descendant of Laskarina Bouboulina, he started work as a tour guide in the family-run Bouboulina Museum from a young age. Over the years, he has progressively moved on to public relations and marketing. He has represented the museum at state and public events, national holidays, exhibitions, as well as overseas. After the passing of his father, Philip, the founder of the museum in 2018, he has taken on the role of director, and with the unstinting support and assistance of his family, continues to work towards the museum's founding principle to restore and preserve Bouboulina's mansion as the national monument it is today, while at the same time guiding the museum firmly into the 21st century. And here I should say that Mr. Demertzis-Bouboulis is one of a handful of young, innovative museum directors who is charting the future of Greece's cultural landscape. It is therefore a singular honor for me to welcome him today to UCLA, as well as to the Embassy in Washington virtually, to speak to us about his home, his museum, and his great ancestor, Laskarina Bouboulina. Please welcome Pavlos Demertzis-Bouboulis.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone joining us today. Kalimera και καλησπέρα σε όλους σας. I would like to welcome you all to the first ever virtual tour of the Bouboulina Museum and presentation of the life of Greek heroine Laskarina Bouboulina. I would first like to thank, of course, the Embassy of Greece to the United States for supporting this event, and Her Excellency, the Ambassador, Ms. Alexandra Papadopoulou, for her most moving remarks. It is indeed a great honor for you to be with us today. Thank you very much. I, of course, have to and want to express my heartfelt thanks to UCLA Stavros Niarchos Foundation Center for the Study of Hellenic Culture, and of course, especially Professor Sharon Gerstel for the incredible work she and her amazing department are doing, and this amazing opportunity offered to me today, and the beautiful moving remarks. Thank you so much. Also, many thanks go to Ms. Elena Varisto and Mr. Simos Zenios for their assistance and guidance leading up to this presentation. I would just like to mention that being in one of the oldest buildings on the island, we are also connected to one of the oldest phone lines on the island. So I do hope my internet stays with us till the end of this presentation. The 200-year anniversary of the Greek War of Independence has been anticipated as a year of great celebration. It is a great honor for me today to be with all of you and talk about the life of our heroic ancestor and the museum we have created here on Spetses in her honor. It is especially important due to the fact that 2021 is not only a landmark for Greece and Spetses, but additionally a year of historical importance to my family and indeed the entire island, as it marks 30 years since the founding of our museum in 1991, and more importantly, 250 years since the birth of Bouboulina in 1771. Even today's date, the 13th of March, is important, a detail which will be revealed to most of you in due course. Our story, therefore, begins in the year 1771, deep in the dungeon prisons of Constantinople, modern-day Istanbul. A young woman from the island of Hydra, heavily pregnant, had been visiting the city to visit her dying husband, Stavrianos Pinotzis. Pinotzis had been recently imprisoned by the Ottoman authorities for his participation in the failed Orlov revolution of the Peloponnese. As luck would have it, Paraskevi went into labor while in the prisons and gave birth to a little girl. The baby survived and was baptized Laskarina. Shortly thereafter, Stavrianos Pinotzis died in prison, and Paraskevi and her newborn daughter returned to their home on Hydra. After 4 years on the island, Paraskevi was married a second time to a Spetses captain and shipowner called Dimitrios Lazaru Orlov, and along with her daughter, they moved to the island of Spetses. I would like to note that the name Orlov here is a nickname because this man also participated in the aforementioned Orlov Revolution. Laskarina, therefore, grew up on Spetses in a very affluent shipping family with 8 half-siblings from her mother's second marriage, of which she was the undisputed leader. According to family history, from a young age, she had a passionate love for the sea and traveled with her stepfather on the family ships. At age 17, Laskarina married a Spetses captain called Dimitrios Yanouzas, with whom she had 3 children. In 1897, however, Yanouzas was killed at sea during a sea battle with North African pirates, and Laskarina, aged just 26, was widowed for the first time. 4 years later, Laskarina was married again to a man called Dimitrios Bouboulis, a captain himself and one of the wealthiest ship owners on the island. It said he was Laskarina's childhood love, and since they were both now widowed, they could at last marry. Laskarina had another 4 children with Bouboulis and also took on the upbringing of his 3 children from his first wife. It is said theirs was a happy and prosperous marriage. However, life can be very cruel, as we all know. And in 1811, Bouboulis was also killed at sea, caught in the crossfire between pirates and a French frigate. Laskarina, now aged 40, was therefore twice widowed and the mother of 10 children in total. At the same time, however, she was a very wealthy woman in the fortunes she had inherited from both her husbands, especially the second one. It is said that in addition to merchant vessels, houses, and land, Bouboulis left her a cash sum of 300,000 talera, which were Spanish silver coins widely used in the Mediterranean. To be able to give everyone listening a general idea of the amount, let me tell you that Bouboulina's flagship, the Agamemnon, considered the first and one of the largest warships of the Greek revolutionary fleet, cost her 75,000 talera. So now I think everyone can understand what the 300,000 represented and the wealth Bouboulina commanded. She not only managed to keep this fortune intact, but to also increase it with successful trading, deft management, and entrepreneurial skill. She became a partner in various other shipping vessels over the years, and she built 3 of her own, one of them being the Agamemnon. This massive fortune would later be spent in support of the revolutionary cause. In 1816, the Ottoman authorities attempted to confiscate this huge fortune with a decree issued by the Sultan himself. They used the excuse that her second husband, Bouboulis, had taken part in the Turco-Russian wars, using his own ships alongside those of the Russian imperial fleet in 1807. Indeed, for these actions, he had been highly decorated and awarded the titles of captain and honorary citizen of Russia. In an effort to save her fortune, Bouboulina traveled to Constantinople and met with the Philhellene Russian ambassador, Count Grigory Strogonov, whom she asked for help, citing her husband's past services to Russia. Her position was made even stronger by the fact that her ships were at that time flying the Russian flag, which was permissible under the 1774 Treaty of Küçük-Kaynarca between Russia and the Ottoman Empire. In order to protect her from imminent arrest, Strogonov arranged for Bouboulina to be almost smuggled to the Crimea while he tried to defuse the situation. She stayed in the Crimea for approximately 3 months at a rural estate, purportedly offered by the Tsar himself, Alexander I. Now, 2 of the most interesting aspects of Bouboulina's story actually took place while she was in Constantinople. Prior to her departure for Russia, she managed to gain an audience with the Sultan's mother, the Valide Sultana, who, after being impressed by Bouboulina's strength of character, convinced her son not to go forward with the confiscation of her property, and Bouboulina was therefore free to return home. It is also said that while she was staying in the Ottoman capital, she became a member of the Filikiateria, a secret underground organization that had been preparing the Greeks for the upcoming revolution since 1814. Unfortunately, there is no proof of this story, and it is contested by most historians, as it is known that the organization only accepted men. If, however, it is true, she would have been the only woman to ever have been initiated, which is something I believe goes rather well with the rest of her story. Bouboulina's preparations for the revolution included the illegal buying of arms and ammunition at foreign ports, which she secretly brought to Spetses on board her ships and hid in her home. In 1820, the construction of her battleship, the Agamemnon, was completed. And by 1821, Bouboulina had her own small army of loyal Spetsiots, ta palikaria mu, her brave lads, which, together with the crews of her ships, she armed, fed, and paid. Her expenses also included large amounts of money used for provisions and ammunition sent to aid the Greek armies on the mainland. As a result of all of this, her considerable fortune was exhausted during the first 2 years of the revolution. Now, the detail to be revealed on why today's date is important. On this day, 200 years ago, the 13th of March of 1821, Laskarina Bouboulina hoisted her very own revolutionary flag on the main mast of the Agamemnon and saluted it with cannon fire in front of the harbor of Spetses. Sadly, this original flag did not survive the test of time, but its design did, as you can see here. The eagle, with its wings lowered, represents Greece occupied by the Ottoman Empire. It holds an anchor and the mythical phoenix. And as many of you might have already guessed, these symbols mean that Greece will be reborn from the ashes of the revolution with the help of the naval force. It is said that Bouboulina was inspired for this design by the flag of the Komnenos dynasty of the Byzantine Empire, the Eastern Roman Empire, and this design remains our family's crest even to this day. Everyone on Spetses and from Spetses takes immense pride in the fact that we were the first of the Greek Isles to officially revolt against the Ottoman Empire on April 3rd, 1821. What you see here is the original Spetses flag, which is in the National History Museum in Athens. Bouboulina, commanding her own fleet, along with a squadron of Spetses warships, sailed west to begin the naval blockade of the fortified city of Nafplio, one of the biggest Ottoman strongholds on the Peloponnese. It is during this time that stories of her daring attacks on the almost impregnable seaside fortifications of the city quickly began spreading throughout Greece. The legend of Bouboulina, the Kapetanissa of Spetses, had begun. Her ships participated in the blockades of Monemvasia and Pylos, and she herself also took part in battles on the mainland. She was present at the Battle of Argos, where her eldest son fell heroically in battle, and she participated in the siege of Tripolis, the capital of the Peloponnesian Peninsula. It is actually said she entered Argos astride an Arabian horse, accompanied by her cheering Spetsiot soldiers. After the fall of Argos to the Greek forces, she sent word back to Spetses stating, "My son is dead, but Argos is ours." Even though her signature is absent from official documents of the war councils, something of course to be expected given the time period we are in and her being a woman, it is said she took part in the decision-making and held the respect of the rest of the Greek commanders. Mutual respect and admiration also led to a strong friendship with General Kolokotronis, with whom she actually became a relative through the later marriage of their children. On the 11th of September, 1821, Tripolis fell to the Greek forces. Unfortunately, the fall of the city was followed by a massive 3-day massacre at the hand of the Greek forces, with accounts varying from 10 to 30,000 slaughtered. During this terrible event, it is said that Bouboulina managed to save the harem, the women and the children of the harem of Khurshid Pasha, the city's Ottoman ruler. This was at great risk to her own life and apparently by threatening her own men. According to our family history, with this act, Bouboulina kept the promise she had given the Valide Sultana back in 1816, that if ever any Ottoman woman asked her for help, she would not refuse, but do her utmost to aid her. Now, it is also said that Bouboulina received a large amount of jewels and treasures from the harem women as a thank you for saving them, which led to many of her contemporaries, as well as historians, to accuse her of pillaging and looting these riches. It cannot be denied that the siege of the city was followed by the looting and pillaging of its riches, and I, for one, will never discount the fact that Bouboulina also had a part in it. What I will say, and I hope is true, whatever she took and however she took it, she spent it in supporting the revolutionary cause. The end of Laskarina Bouboulina is a tragic one, much like the end of her flagship. Following her death, the Agamemnon was bought in 1829 by the Greek state, along with other ships of the revolution, in an attempt to strengthen the newly formed state fleet. Placed under the command of legendary revolutionary Constantin Canaris, it was renamed Isle of Spetses and was considered one of the best ships in the fleet. Unfortunately, Bouboulina's flagship was destroyed at the island of Poros during the civil conflicts of 1831. During a standoff between the forces of Governor Kapodistrias and the opposing forces of Hydra under the command of Admiral Miaoulis, some of the principal ships of the Greek state were blown up, among them the Agamemnon. The only part of the ship that is in existence today is its figurehead, which you can see here on display in the National History Museum in Athens. Now, according to our family tradition, 2 cannons were also salvaged from the wreck of the Agamemnon. One of these was apparently melted in 1930 and used to create commemorative medals for the centenary celebrations of the revolution. Please note that due to the Asia Minor campaign in 1921, the centenary celebrations were moved to a decade afterwards. And it is, I'd love to say, our great pleasure to be able to present UCLA Stavros Niarchos Foundation Center with one of these medals as a thank you for today. As for the Megali Kira herself, the great lady, you may expect the story of a glorious death in a sword fight surrounded by her loyal soldiers, or an explosive naval battle against enemy ships. Unfortunately, history and I have to disappoint you. After the fall of Nafplio to the Greek forces in November 1822, Bouboulina remained in the city in a property offered to her by the state as a reward for her services to the nation. Towards the end of 1824, the country was once again torn apart by a second destructive civil war between opposing factions vying for the control of the revolution and the newly born state. Panos Kolokotronis, Bouboulina's son-in-law, was assassinated and his father, the general, imprisoned. Bouboulina, in support of Kolokotronis, was considered a threat and danger to the state, and after being arrested twice, she was finally expelled from Nafplio and she returned home. Therefore, in early 1825, Bouboulina was living on Spetses, almost in exile, her fortune exhausted and full of bitterness for both the various factions of the revolution and the inconclusive outcome of the struggle for freedom. The Egyptian Admiral Ibrahim had landed on the Peloponnese almost unchallenged due to the civil war, and the revolution was in grave danger of being lost completely. Kolokotronis was released and made leader of the army once more, and Bouboulina began preparations to once again take up arms, her bitter emotions suppressed by the love she had for her country. Death, however, struck unexpectedly. Bouboulina was killed on the 22nd of May, 1825, in the home she shared with her first husband, Dimitrios Giannouzas. Her son, Georgios, had fallen in love with young Evgenia Koutsis, daughter of the powerful and influential Koutsis family of Spetses. The girl's family did not approve of the match, due to the fact that Bouboulina had, by this point, spent her fortune, but more importantly, their daughter was promised to marry someone else on the island. The young couple's love, however, was too strong and they eloped. They hid in Giannouzas' house, although there are accounts that state they had left the island completely. Bouboulina was alerted of the event and was present at the house when the Koutsis family arrived to retrieve the girl, enraged, as the elopement was of course considered a grave insult according to the traditions of the time. Bouboulina confronted the angered mob from an open window and not only supported the couple, but refused to return the girl. Her fearsome and implacable words were enough to arm the hand of her killer, and the fearless Kapetanissa was instantly killed by a bullet to the forehead. Due to the waning evening light, the name of the killer has never been uncovered. It is worth noting that Laskarina Bouboulina was, until recently, the first and only woman in world naval history to hold the title of Admiral, an honorary title awarded to her after her death by Tsar Alexander I. In 2018, the Greek state recognized her heroic actions by awarding her the honorary title of Rear Admiral, along with the Military Cross First Class and the Medal of Distinguished Actions. I would now like to welcome all of you into the Bouboulina Museum on Spetses. The museum was founded in 1991 by my late father Philip and my mother Linda in a final effort to save the 350-year-old mansion from certain collapse. Even though a designated heritage site since 1925 via presidential decree, unfortunately state assistance had been minimal and the cost of maintenance and restoration was impossible for the family to keep up with. It is a non-profit private organization, and its main objectives, apart from the restoration and maintenance of the building and grounds, are its function as a cultural center and national monument, ensuring that this legendary woman's story is known to the world. To date, more than 1.5 million euros, mainly generated from the proceeds of visitors' tickets, but also state and European funding, have been spent on building restoration and artifact restoration, and the museum has welcomed more than 1.3 million visitors from Greece and abroad. I'm also proud to say that to date we have translated her story into 25 languages. Construction of the mansion began in the late 17th century to the designs of a Mauritanian architect who had studied in Florence. I think you may have all noticed the Moorish arches the building has. It was built for the Bouboulis family, ancestors of Laskarina's second husband, and it was most likely built in stages. As the family grew wealthier over the decades, rooms and eventually the second floor were added to the original building. Also, on the external wall facing the mountain of the island, there are 3 remaining rifle openings, a remnant of the necessary defenses against marauders. The museum is housed on the mansion's first floor and comprises 4 rooms, which we will now have a closer look at. We will start with the foyer, the entrance hall to the mansion, the first room a visitor would enter. Now, at the base of the staircase, you can all see a large painting, which I would say is arguably the most well-known depiction of Bouboulina, always used wherever she is mentioned. And as you can see, she is pictured here during the siege of Naval. Now, this is actually a copy of the original painting, which was done by Bavarian artist Peter von Hess and was commissioned by the King of Bavaria, who was father to the new King of Greece, Otto. The original painting was believed to have been destroyed during the Second World War, but we recently discovered it does indeed exist in Munich. We are hoping to one day be able to exhibit it in our museum on loan. Many of you may remember that the same design was also on the 50 drachma banknote and the 1 drachma coin used until 2001 before the euro. This room displays various documents of the time, 2 of them written by Bouboulina herself. In this one example you see here, I think you will all agree she was also an educated lady. As you can see, we have calligraphy, paragraphs, and delicate handwriting, and we have recently been told that there are documents of hers in French and Italian in the state archives. Now, if this last bit is true, that means Bouboulina was a lot more educated than we ever believed. You also see her signature on the bottom left-hand corner, and she signs as Laskarina Delta from her husband, Dimitriou Boubouli. So Laskarina is her first name, Boubouli her surname. For our non-Greek friends listening today, the name she became famous with, Bouboulina, is a nickname, meaning the female Bouboulis or the wife of Bouboulis, a tradition still found in rural areas of Greece and the islands. For all the Greeks with us, I don't know if you can make it out, she signs as Ipetherasou, your mother-in-law, because this is to one of her son-in-laws. I think for everyone that is a scary thought. Amongst the items exhibited in this room worth noting, as you can see here, a 19th century embossed Ottoman wash basin with a matching jug, and to the left you can see a beautiful papier-mâché 19th century Venetian serving tray. Now these seem to have been popular because, as you can see, we have a second one here, also made of papier-mâché, framed by a pair of beautiful 18th century Ottoman vases from Kütahya. Also here you see an example 2 of 8 beautiful 19th century Viennese gilded teacups with silver spoons. Unfortunately, not many personal effects of the heroine remain, but we are very lucky to have her original headscarf, a part of the traditional outfit of a woman of the time, made of silk with real gold and silver thread, retaining its beautiful colors even after more than 2 centuries of life. A gorgeous example of 19th century Greek embroidery. Now, one of the most interesting items on display in this room is, of course, Bouboulina's personal sword. This was an honorary gift from the Tsar of Russia, Alexander I, likely given to her when she was in the Crimea. It is of Northwest African origin. They are called Manding or Mandingo swords, and this one has a secret. You may have noticed the rounded tip of the leather sheath. Now, this bit was always filled with a potent liquid poison, meaning the blade of the sword was constantly dipped in it. Therefore, if Bouboulina did not manage to kill her enemy in battle, he or she was doomed to die anyway of the poisoned wound. A most effective weapon indeed. In this room, we also have various depictions of Bouboulina from around Europe. These two, I would say, are the most interesting. A Russian Lubok. Lubki were Russian popular prints. They were characterized by simple graphics, almost like a precursor to modern-day comic books. In both of them, Bouboulina is shown astride a horse wielding her sword, probably during the siege of Tripolis. And the one on the left is actually an original donated to the museum. Both of these prove that her legend had traveled even to 19th century Tsarist Russia. Now we can move on to our next room, the winter parlor. As you can see, there is a fireplace at the end. Now, this room would have mostly been used by family members and rarely by guests, unless they happen to visit during the winter months. Please take note, there is a door to the left of the image next to the sofa. I would like to draw your attention to this wall of cupboards. Imagine, if you will, that they extended to the right, all the way to the wall, meaning there was no door connecting the previous room we saw to this one. The real entrance was the door I asked you to notice in the previous slide. The top part of the cupboard was used as a hiding place for valuables, weapons, or even women and children. In addition, you may have noticed that the left part of the cupboard has no door. That is because there is a staircase behind it which leads to the ground floor. And we believe that in Bouboulina's days, there may also have been one connecting the top floor also. Now, all of this was not added, but this is how, on the contrary, this is how houses and mansions were built back then for security and protection against pirates, bandits, and of course the Ottomans. Now, this is called a mesandra or a musandra in Greek and can be found throughout the country, especially in the north and the Balkan area. You may have noticed in the corner a beautiful example of a traditional bridal trunk used to store women's dowries. A dowry is prika in Greek. This would usually be presented at the wedding. This particular one is Venetian, made in 1854, so this is after Laskarina's time, and has the most beautiful decoration in its interior. As you can see here, printed paper with repeated scenes of the city of Venice. The furnishing in this room is from the early to the late 19th century, English, French, Greek, and as you see here in this photograph, Viennese. A traditional Greek island sofa. The curves you see on the back and sides are supposedly the waves of the Greek seas. In Greek, it's called an Aegiopelagitikos, an Aegean style. You can find this on all the Greek islands and coastal areas. Of course, we have to look at this beautiful 19th century French mantle clock, gilded, inlaid with fine porcelain de Sèvres from France, one of the principal European porcelain manufacturers. The miniatures to the left and right on the buffet are also made of the same porcelain. On the right, we have Elisabeth Vigée-Lebrun. This lady was a prominent French portrait painter of the late 18th century. She had the patronage of Marie Antoinette, of whom she created more than 30 portraits. The lady on the left, we think is Isabella Theotoki, a friend of the artists. Now here we have a very interesting photograph. Taken in 1868, it shows the old harbor of Spetses and is considered the first photograph taken of the island. I would draw everyone's attention to the fact The island had quite a fleet and was rather densely populated back then. You can see the great number of houses and mansions spreading along the coast and up the hills. When the revolution began in 1821, Spetses numbered approximately 18, maybe even 20,000 permanent residents. Some accounts mention even more, whereas neighboring Hydra, the richest and most powerful of the Greek islands, was more than 25,000. With a combined fleet of over 250 ships of various sizes, Spetses and Hydra were the leading naval powers of the time in Greece, along, of course, with the island of Psara. This wealth was a result of successful shipping trade, which really took off during the trade embargoes imposed during the Napoleonic Wars. The 1774 Treaty of Küçükkaynarca, which I mentioned earlier, under which Greek merchant vessels could fly the Russian flag, was of great importance. It afforded them the protection of Imperial Russia and almost free movement and trade in the Mediterranean. Notice all the merchant vessels anchored in the harbor. There is an account by a visitor to the island who says that Spetses had so many merchant vessels that when anchored side by side, you could walk from one end of the harbor to the next. After the War of Independence ended and the new state was born, the center of power gradually moved to Athens. The ports of Piraeus and Hermopolis on Syros became the new shipping trade centers. Thus, the importance and wealth of Spetses and Hydra gradually faded. Their populations dwindled. There are also photographs of various descendants of Bouboulina in this room. This one is very interesting, taken in the mansion's garden in 1959. As you can see, and you may have recognized her already, the Greek actress Irene Papas during the filming of the movie Bouboulina, which explains, of course, her outfit. The man next to her is Bouboulina's great-grandson, Admiral Nikolaos Bouboulis, my great-grandfather, who lived in the house at the time. Now, this item is a favorite of all our guests, especially young children. I would usually play a guessing game, but since we do have a time schedule, I will get right onto it. Now, this is an 18th century quill and ink container. I think the shape is self-explanatory. They are of Oriental origin and called the calamari in Greek. Now, if anyone here can remember the Greeks among us, it is mentioned in Greek Christmas carols, Chartike calamari. Also, if we have anyone listening from Cyprus, the nickname of a Greek, kalamaras, is derived from this here item. Now, this is always an interesting part of the tour, as many Greeks do not know the origin of the name or what a calamari is when singing Christmas carols. I, for one, always thought they meant a squid, which was always very confusing. Before we leave this room, I would like to introduce you to someone else, heroine of Greece's more recent history. This woman is Lella Karayani, a leader in the Greek resistance during the Nazi occupation of Greece. In 1941, she created the resistance group Bouboulina, which she funded herself. You can see here the numbers and members. The group's activities included smuggling British officers out of Greece to Cairo, counter-espionage and sabotage. Lella Karayani was considered one of the Nazis' biggest problems in the entire Balkan area, and her counterintelligence activities were vital to the Greek resistance. Lella Karayani was a great-granddaughter of Laskarina Bouboulina. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Often called the Bouboulina of the resistance, Lella Karayani was unfortunately arrested in 1944 and after days of torture executed a mere 34 days before the liberation of Athens. Grandmother and granddaughter, both heroines of Greece, both never able to see their country liberated. Our next room is the mansion's dining room. The furniture you see here is a set, a dining table and two buffet tables, mid-19th century English. The main exhibit in here, however, is the model of her flagship, the Agamemnon. Designed and constructed by Dimitrios Perdikas, a shipbuilder from the island of Skopelos, but who actually built some of the best ships of Spetses at the time, the Agamemnon was considered one of the largest and finest vessels in the Greek fleet. Now, this was a ship built for war, a brig 33 meters long, armed with 18 heavy cannons and manned by more than 80 sailors. As you can understand, these facts were brought to the attention of the Ottoman authorities by Bouboulina's enemies on the island, as at the time, there were restrictions in place on the size of ships and the type of armament allowed. Bouboulina was, of course, accused of building a warship in secret. but due to her resourcefulness in bribing the Ottoman inspectors, she not only managed to complete the construction of the ship, but to also expel her accusers from the island. To accompany this model, we have one of the most interesting artifacts in the house, a firman, a decree signed by the Sultan himself, and this is specifically the Agamemnon's building license. The intricate symbol in the center of the document is the Sultan's seal, or tugra. His personal signature is in the bottom left-hand corner. It was Mahmud II at the time. And of course, this text is written from right to left in the old Ottoman Turkish alphabet. The surprise, however, is on the other side of the document, for if one was to flip it over, you would see this, the original design of Bouboulina's Agamemnon. Above the design are various details, such as provisions and prices, and our model and the previous painting you saw were partly based on this design. So this is what Bouboulina would have commissioned from the shipbuilder, which then, of course, had to be sent to the Ottoman authorities to be approved and signed. As you can understand, this is a very rare document. In this room, we also have a collection of rather rare post-Byzantine icons, as you can see, and I will focus on the one in the center. This icon depicts St. Nicholas, saint of the sailors and navy in Greece. The date on the icon is 24th of April, 1811, which, if you remember from the previous story, that is the year Bouboulis, her second husband, was killed at sea. So we believe this icon to be in memory of her husband. The 12 circles at the base of the icon depict stages in the saint's life and some of the miracles attributed to him. And notice the beautifully intricate carvings of birds and plants all the way around the icon. I would like you to know that the truly amazing aspect of the icon, all of that is one solid piece of wood, a solid carving, a true masterpiece of its time. The porcelain in this room is all English, 19th century, very traditional of the time, as you can see from this pair of English water jugs. However, we do have some more exotic items. A pair of blue porcelain Chinese jars, beautifully decorated with panels of floral patterns and birds. And we have been told these were most probably used as ginger jars. This is one of two large Chinese porcelain platters, again intricately decorated with the same kind of patterns. All four of these artifacts are of the Famille Bleue family of Qing dynasty Chinese porcelain and are dated between 1640 and 1660. Before we go to the last room, I would like you to look at this oil painting of the house in the early 1920s. The artist is Pavlos Demertzis-Bouboulis, a Greek impressionist who studied chemistry at Oxford before studying art at the Munich Academy. And this painting has been a basic guide for the restoration work done to the facade of the mansion, so nothing was changed by accident. And last, but certainly not least, we have Bouboulina's Grand Salon and reception room, the largest, most impressive room in the mansion. These grand living rooms were used by the lord or lady of the house to host their guests, and therefore were built to impress and inspire awe, a testament to the owner's wealth and position in society. If you put your imagination to work, you can also imagine that it was here that the Capitanissa would hold meetings with her sons, her soldiers, and her captains, discussing tactics and planning the attacks on enemy ships. We shall, of course, begin with the magnificent ceiling above. A masterful example of wood carving, and according to family history, this ceiling was made in Florence, which is where the architect studied, as I previously mentioned. It was shipped to the island and assembled in the house when it was being constructed, meaning that this ceiling is most likely over 3 centuries old. With intricately carved details of Ottoman-inspired motifs, there are not many examples of such ceilings left in Greece. And this is arguably, if not the most, one of the most beautiful to be found on Spetses. This ceiling is one of the main reasons my family decided to open the house to the public, to save this beautiful masterpiece you see before you from further destruction due to the condition of the building. The various degrees of the color black you may have noticed is unfortunately water damage from the leaky roof over the years. The furniture in this room is of various ages and origins. This beautiful piece here we know to have been Bouboulina's private secretaire, her writing desk. Also from Florence, made of beautiful rosewood. It sadly also has water damage from the past, proof of the house's dilapidated condition. Never forget, Greece was a part of the Ottoman Empire, so every mansion and house would also have items and furniture from the Orient, such as this coal burner. Note the half moon it has. This would have been used to heat the room or maybe even cook. And you also have a glimpse of the massive Ottoman 18th century carpet of this room, which is specifically from the city of Uşak. The city of Uşak is still, up until the 20th century, known for its carpet making. We also have two Arabian tables, and here you see one of them, from the late 18th century, inlaid with mother of pearl, very traditional of the time. Again, you get a glimpse of the carpet, and in the background, the large Ottoman-styled sofa called an odas, which would have been found in all the houses of the time. However, the most interesting exhibit, I would say, is this, Bouboulina's private safe. Now, this ironclad safe was made in France, Marseille to be specific, in the late 18th to early 19th century, and you can see that the door has 3 keys. The first key would be used for the tongue of the door. The second controls 8 locks which come out of the door and surround it, 2 on every side. I think it's truly impressive. The third, the smallest but most important key, locks the first 2 keys in place, so you cannot turn them or remove them. And if or when Bouboulina removed the third key, the iron plate next to it would automatically click to the left and hide the keyhole with a mechanism in the door. Therefore, if this was already locked and you did not have the third key in your possession, or perhaps you even didn't know it existed if the hole was already hidden, you understand there was no possible way of opening this door. A truly impressive feat of engineering for that time, and Bouboulina kept this on the Agamemnon. Thankfully, the safe was brought to the house before the ship was sold to the state. Here you see Bouboulina's private pistol, which she used in battle, a traditional example of Balkan craftsmanship of the time, gilded and intricately decorated. She would have had this pass through her belt, as we see in most of the paintings. Also, a few family portraits in this room. This is Bouboulina's youngest son, Captain Nikolaos Bouboulis, whom we as a family are descendants of. Born around 1808, it is said he accompanied his mother on the Agamemnon at a very young age and was present at her side at Argos and Tripolis. He also became commander of the Agamemnon for a short period when it was owned by the state. He was married to Princess Sophia Komnenos, a member of the Byzantine Komnenos dynasty. Fun fact, it is said that they also eloped, that he swept her away from her family in Messaloniki on the back of his horse. Unconventional love stories seem to run in the family. Then we have his son, so Bouboulina's grandson, Georgios Bouboulis. Born in 1847, he joined the Greek Navy, served with distinction and retired with the rank of Admiral. After that, he began a political career, first as an MP for Spetses and later serving as Minister of Naval Affairs. Now, he was married to the rather intimidating Mrs. Efrosini Damianou, and they had 4 sons, later all 4 of them to become admirals in the Greek Navy. You have already seen one of them standing next to Irene Papas. Both of these previous portraits were painted by Georgios Roilos, one of the most important and influential painters in Greece in the late 19th and early 20th century. Now, our tours would usually begin with this painting. However, as we are being hosted by UCLA today, I decided to keep this for the end, and I think you will all understand why if you haven't already guessed. Now, this oil painting has been used many times in school books, history books, and documentaries when Bouboulina is mentioned, and I would say it is probably the most well-known depiction of her following the first painting we saw, which is in Munich. Laskarina Bouboulina during one of her daring naval attacks on the castles of Nafplio. You can see the castles in the top left-hand corner and her fleet in the right behind her. Now, for anyone who has not had the pleasure of visiting Greece, Nafplio is a seaside city to the west of Spetses on the Peloponnesian coast. Called Napoli di Romania by the Venetians, it was always an important port for Mediterranean trading vessels and was continuously fortified over the course of almost 500 years by the Byzantines, the Venetians, the Franks, and of course the Ottomans. At the time of the Greek Revolution, under Ottoman control, it boasted three castles and over 300 cannons. Furthermore, the Ottomans had placed chains running in the water between the island fort of Burzi, which you can see in this gravure, and the coast. As you can understand, we are talking about a formidable and almost impregnable adversary to the small Greek ships. Attempting to reach the coast by rowing boat would be a suicide mission. If you look closely, the sailors are scared, huddled together, leaning backwards, terrified gazers. Why would the artist do this when one would expect scenes of bravery and courage in such a scene, even for propaganda reasons? Of course, the reason is comparison to Bouboulina, the Capitanissa, who is the antithesis, standing tall, steadfast, and fearless. I would like to draw everyone's attention to a fact that a lot of people forget or don't realize. When Bouboulina decided to take up arms, to enter the fight for freedom, to command soldiers and ships, she was in her 50th year. Now, in 1821, being 50 years old was not young. On the contrary, she was considered at least advanced in age, if not an old woman. General Theodoros Kolokotronis, for example, the Greeks with us know this, has gone down in Greek history as O Yeros tou Moria, the old man of the Moria. He was 51, just 1 year older than her. You can understand this only adds to the immensity of her accomplishments. I suppose many of you have guessed the reason I kept this for the end. There has never been a visitor from the US who has not commented on the striking similarities between these two paintings. I think you can all see them. Two oarsmen, the heroes standing alone, everyone else seated with flag bearers behind them. Unfortunately, our painting has no signature. It has always been in the house, but we believe the artist was at least familiar with the work of Emanuel Gottlieb Lurz, the artist of the Washington painting. Perhaps he was his student or a member also of the Dusseldorf Academy. Whatever the connection may be, I find it very heartening as it continues the cycle of mutual inspiration that has nurtured the friendship between Greece and the United States for the past 200 years, very eloquently stated by the US ambassador to Greece. This time, however, it is expressed in the form of art. Now we have come to the end of our tour, and I would like to leave you all with some food for thought. Laskarina Bouboulina, the Capitanissa, naval commander and heroine of the Greek Revolution. This is the punchline of her story that almost every Greek around the world knows. However, if you look closely, she is so much more than that. She was a woman, twice widowed, a mother of 10 children, an accomplished businesswoman, an entrepreneur who managed her own wealth and shipping enterprises, a born leader who commanded her own fleet and her own private army, an honorary admiral. All of this in early 19th century Greece, a land dominated by men and patriarchal tradition. To me, she was a phenomenon in her own right, a pioneer of her time, whose story inspired writers, poets, and artists throughout Europe. If you are willing, furthermore, to accompany me and move past the Greek Revolution, consider modern-day civil and equal rights movements and the struggle for the emancipation of women throughout the world. I believe Bouboulina's story could not be more relevant today. And to leave you with a quote by the historian Orlandos from Spetses, nowhere and in no other time has any woman been found in the uprisings of nations, having such a character and able to inspire the world's admiration. Thank you all very much for your time and attention, and I hope you enjoyed the tour.
Thank you so much, Pavlos, for that amazing, just amazing lecture. I just want to point out that there are people here from Kalamata, County Wexford, Ireland, Chicago, Edmonton, Canada, Oslo, New York, Thessaloniki, Santa Barbara, Sydney, Australia, Spetses. Many people from Spetses are descended from Spetsiotis, and also from Madrid, and of course from Washington. So this talk has generated so much interest, and we're so proud to have you here virtually on campus and present to the world about your very famous ancestor. We're so impressed by all the work you've done at the museum. And I think that the talk has also generated a number of questions, follow-up questions. For example, one of the listeners asks about biographies. Can you recommend any biographies of Laskarina Bouboulina for those who are listening?
Now, something that is quite unfortunate, there are not a lot of details about her life, mainly written, probably they're all historians after her time, Greek or foreigners. Biographies are very short. You can have our museum's one, which has the basic story. There is a new biography which came out last week. I was actually part of the presentation of the book by a very good Greek historian, Kyriakos Hadjikyriakidis. We can give you all these details, of course. This is part of a series of books which is created by Metechmio Publications, and it's covering a number of heroes, and Bouboulina is one of them. And then we have historical novels, which are based on the history, but a little bit more free. We have, of course, Sofia Aliberti, which was the first woman to write a book about Bouboulina, and Mrs. Kekropoulou, also an excellent historian and an excellent book.
I want to say that among the people in our audience is April Householder, who's written a dissertation, who'll be turning it into a book, and I'll put the two of you in touch with each other after the lecture.
I remember meeting April when I was very young on the island.
Great. Similarly, there's a question of film projects. Are there new documentaries in production? Are there plans for one linked to the celebration of the Greek Revolution this year?
There have been a number of filming crews in our museum over the past winter, and on the 25th of March, there's going to be the premiere of an excellent documentary which we were filming here in the summer and in the autumn. It is on Cosmote history, and then of course it will be online as well. And then we will have a premiere on the island on the 29th of May, hopefully, in our museum. And this is about the history of Spetses and Bouboulina. Not only Spetses, but not only Bouboulina, all of Spetses during the revolution. Now, there also are a few scripts written for films about Bouboulina over the past few years, I think 3 or 4. Some of them had got very close to funding, but sadly never crossed the threshold. So there is interest. And I think the more we move on into this year and her story becomes more known, it would probably be very likely that we could get a new film made.
One of our listeners says that the museum used to have a website. Is there a way to order merchandise or information online? You and I have discussed that. And
exactly.
We
took our, thank you for the question. We took our old website offline, and we are in the process of creating the new one. Hopefully very, very soon it will be online, and with our new e-shop also, and with new products and new books. And hopefully that will be available online with our new logo also very soon for this year.
So we will be posting a recording of this lecture, and we will follow up by sending everybody the link to the shop once it's open to help support the museum. I wonder if you can say something just as a museum director about the impact of COVID on the museum's operations and how you are addressing those issues that have been generated by a lack of visitors to the museum.
I have to say that COVID has had a huge impact, not only on museums, on culture as a general spectrum, but especially museums. It's almost been a death blow, especially small museums, private museums who are dependent on seasonal tourism. The past year, museums were basically almost the last businesses to open on the 15th of June, around the middle of June in the summer. And we had to deal with all these new restrictions. For us, it was very difficult because from the founding of our museum, we worked with tours. It wasn't a walk-through museum. We didn't have signs on everything. It was Bouboulina's house. So you would enter via tour. With the new restrictions, tours were not allowed, and we had obviously a limit on visitors based on square meters. So we could not basically operate. We had to come up with completely new ideas. Basically, in a very short period of time, we had to stop the tours, number all of our exhibits, and basically print out all of the relevant information. I will be honest, it has been an idea of mine to, if not, probably not stop the tours completely, but have the option of not touring, which means the museum will change in the future in line with the 21st century. But to go back to your question, it has been very, very difficult. And this year was the closest we've ever come to actually closing down due to the crisis. It was way too close for comfort. And hopefully going into the new season, the area of culture will be dealt with in a more appropriate manner, I hope.
Just related to what you've just said, there are some people asking, is there a way to donate to the museum to support it?
Right now, we have, of course, just a bank account, which we can share with you, but we are also taking legal advice of founding a society of friends. Hopefully that will be founded before the summer season begins. And that will be a way of supporting the museum financially, ethically, and practically. And I thank you very much for the question. And hopefully with that support, we can come into the 21st century stronger.
Now, there are some questions directly about Bouboulina, and a very interesting question from Boston was, I was wondering if there are any historical evidence of formative relationships and influences on Bouboulina early in her life before her revolutionary exploits, and are there any historical commentaries on how she was viewed by other females who are contemporaries?
Mm-hmm. There is actually not a lot of information on her until she reached basically the age of the revolution, other than a few family stories. As I said, she grew up loving the sea, traveling, etc., etc. Now, because there are in our museum, amongst our books, there is Shakespeare, Voltaire, and Schiller in English, French, and German. We cannot be sure that she read these books, but given that she had some sort of education, and because the islanders always came into contact with Europe, with other cultures, with new ideas, this is obviously for her also, this is where the inspiration and the ideas of freedom would also come from. And after her time, Bouboulina was a huge inspiration, especially in France. I will say that after Greece, she is more well-known in France, especially in Paris. There was an outfit based on her called La Bobeline or La Robeline, come from robe and Bouboulina.
Now, there are many questions from people who are descended from members of her crew or other people in Spetses. One of the questions has to do, I mean, are there, let's say, get-togethers of people who are assembled, who are part of the family, the greater family of Bouboulina?
Going back to her story, as I said, she had 7 children of her own and the 3 children of her second husband's first marriage. So just from that, you can understand how large the family is. And obviously, not everyone, not all the branches continued, but the family is very, very large, meaning we actually don't know everyone. There have been instances where we have met descendants of Bouboulina in the museum during tours, who actually visited the museum from abroad or from other places in Greece. The immediate family, we all know each other, and we have, of course, cousins on the island from Bouboulina's 3 extra children from her first marriage. There are get-togethers, and in Greece, of course, there is the Society of Descendants of Heroes of 1821.
So interesting. When we have a question from somebody who's descended from Kosmas Barbatzis, can you say something about the relationship, or if there is a relationship between Bouboulina and Barbatzis, another hero of the revolution?
Now, there is a story. Sadly, we don't have the list of who were her brave lads, but there is a story that Barbatzis was one of them, and obviously traveled with her. But during Barbatzis is famous on Spetses as being the legendary fire ship captain during the naval battle of Spetses, which happened on the 8th of September of 1822. Bouboulina at that point was blockading Naval, so she wasn't here when he became famous for his heroic action. But we do have the story that he was part of her crew. And I am very lucky to know a lovely lady a few years ago who is a descendant of him also. Other
questions about the museum include how it was begun, and where were all of the objects that you've shown us? Were objects purchased for the museum? Were they all in her collection? How did you assemble this amazing collection of objects?
So this house was a summer residence. From the 20th century onwards, I would say it was a summer residence. Even my grandmother, who was born in 1921, she grew up in Athens, and so did my father. They would come here for the summer and the Easter and Christmas holidays. So the house was never abandoned. Everything you saw was always in the house, and they lived in the house up until a point. But as I said, the condition of the house was very, very bad. Even during the first years of the museum, before the big restoration began, I remember being woken up by my parents at 4 o'clock in the morning and having to run up the stairs with buckets and towels to cover everything because the ceilings were leaking. So everything was in the house, nothing was added afterwards. And thankfully it has been saved, but all the markings on them are testament to the dilapidated state it was in.
So while we're in the middle of this chat, April Householders actually volunteered to set up a GoFundMe campaign to support the museum. So I'll be happy to circulate that to everyone.
Thank you so much, April. That is amazing.
And, you know, there's so many comments, and of course, I'm going to send you all of the comments, but one from Stephen Tustin just recently. I love that Bouboulina is so symbolic of the importance of Greek women in the history and culture. I think the museum would be a great tribute to the influence of Greek women and women in general in our world. I would love to support your efforts. And those are the kinds of comments that are coming in as a result of this amazing lecture.
As you can see, I can't stop smiling. This has been an incredible experience, and the feedback is absolutely mind-blowing. I'm so happy and proud of all of it. Thank you, everybody.
And it's thrilling to see the comments just pouring in, I have to say, and I can't wait for you to read. I
see a few of them coming in, yes.
One question is there a replica of the oil painting, the beautiful oil painting from the courtyard of the house? Is that available for sale at the museum?
The oil painting, yes. We have gravures of the oil painting and most of her depictions, and we are waiting for new depictions being printed of her. Definitely, the oil painting is one of the most beautiful paintings we have in the house.
So other questions, I would invite people, if they want to say something directly, feel free to raise your hand and I'll be able to call on you. In terms of the painting from in Germany today, there were many people who were very concerned that it should be returned or come back to the museum. What's the status of this?
The painting was never in Greece. The painting by the Bavarian artist was never in Greece. It was never owned by anyone in Greece. So its rightful place is in Germany, in its rightful owners. But that is one of the most famous depictions of it. So we would love to be able to have it here on loan, but its rightful place is, of course, in Munich.
Pavel, I have another question. Is it true that there's no true representation of Bouboulina and that all of her portraits, that they all look very different? Are they only imaginations of what she would have looked like? Do we know really what she looked like?
Unfortunately, there is no real portrait of her. Most of them, they are based on descriptions, and she is described by her contemporaries, a big, well-built woman, dark hair, fierce facial features. But then we get the completely Europeanized versions, such as paintings by Spiros Prosalentis, but more famously by Adam de Friedel, a Danish military officer and traveler in Greece. He did portraits of most of the Greek heroes. His original portrait of her, which I used in the presentation, did not go down very well, apparently, in Europe. So the next ones, she slowly, gradually became this beautiful Europeanized version of herself. And there is a story that during the siege of Nafplio, or Tripolis, if I'm not mistaken, the camp was visited by foreign dignitaries, friends of the Greek cause, and they were shocked. The French visitors were shocked to meet this woman with guns and swords and in her 50s. And according to them, when they told her how they imagined her in Paris, she couldn't stop laughing.
And yet I'm thinking she had a very delicate handwriting.
Exactly.
It's a contradictory image of her.
Exactly, contradictory, the word.
I have to say that I think we're in the long 2021. It's going to be a year that goes much beyond.
Exactly. Oh, yes, to go back to that, because next year, Spetses, we are very lucky to be able to celebrate 2 bicentennials, because next year is the 200 year of the Armata naval battle, which I already mentioned. So it is going to be another celebratory year next year. So that's the good thing for us, is that anything we cannot do this year, we can move into next year. So we will have 2 years of celebrations.
There's actually, related to the museum, a great question from Vasiliki Pavli, who asks if there are programs for children at the museum. I mean, I think about all the girls in the United States who dress up like Bouboulina for various questions. Are there programs specifically oriented toward children?
I have to be honest, there aren't. Because we always worked with tours, we always work with a lot of school children, especially from March till May when the school trips happen. The tour obviously is altered when it comes to children, and they are always, after the tour, they always have little events in the garden. It's usually a contest or a drawing contest or a question contest. We always are open to hosting their theatrical plays, but anything more specific than that, I will be honest that we don't have, no.
I'll recall that my daughter, who visited the museum when she was 11, thought it was the best museum in Greece and wrote so in the visitor's book, and it means in her mind is this fantastic experience.
I remember that. It was absolutely brilliant.
Pavlo, who would you like to play Bouboulina in a film? Do you have an actress in mind who embodies your vision of Bouboulina?
Oh, this is a tough question. When I was younger, I don't know if I always thought that Fanny Ardant, the French actress, she's also played Maria Callas, would have been the perfect choice for Bouboulina, because I always thought it was a mixture of beauty and fierceness that she had, same as Maria Callas, basically. Today, I don't know. This is a tough question.
Perhaps it's something we could invite the listeners to make some suggestions.
Make some suggestions, and maybe we can approach some people.
I think the museum is such a special place, and I think for those of us who've been there, I mean, it's a place that you want to go to again and again. I know so many people right now want to make a contribution to the museum, so that's information that we will send out to you via email in the next few days. In the meantime, just 1 or 2 other questions. Michael Vasiliou asks, are there any folk songs that mention Bouboulina?
Yes, there are one or 2 songs, but please don't ask me to sing them, because I cannot do that.
We usually torture our speakers in that way. Other questions? So again, as I said, we will be posting the recording of this lecture, and we will also record it in Greek for those who want to share it with their children. And we will be circulating in the next few days a follow-up email that gives you information about the merchandise as soon as the shop goes live. And we will, now we feel like we have a partnership with the museum, so we will continue to follow up with Pavlos as things move on. And we're really excited about future collaborations with a kind of network of private museums in Greece.